Hello guys, welcome to today's lab. Students in class are going to be following this handout. It's about density ID, so they are going to be looking at 5 different chemicals, 5 different materials we have in here, and trying to identify what they are based on their density. Now, because what they are doing requires kind of a actually doing some stuff in the classroom, I'm going to kind of walk through an example of what that would look like, and then I'll be giving you guys some data, and then you'll have to be answering some questions based on that data on Canvas. So the 5 different materials that they have to identify are this material. This is material A. I don't know how well you guys can see that. Maybe if I do this. Okay, so that's A. This is B. This is material C. This is material D. And this is material E. Okay, so those 5 materials they're going to be looking to identify in class today. Now, the method for doing this is to find density. And finding density requires 2 things, knowing the mass and knowing the volume. Now, finding the mass is easy. You just place it on a scale and it gives you the mass of that object. But we're going to be looking at the volume real quick. So for the volume, they're going to be using this graduated cylinder here. Okay, this graduated cylinder goes up to 10 milliliters, and it has a small line at every 0.2 milliliters. Now, what they're going to be doing to find the volume is they're going to be putting some water in this. That water will be the initial volume of water. They'll then place those unknown objects into this graduated cylinder, and it will cause the water to rise. However much the water rises, that is the volume of the object they placed in there. So let's look at an example up here on the board. So let's say they had a graduated cylinder, and the water started at 5.05 milliliters. Okay, so they have the graduated cylinder, the water's at 5.05 milliliters. Now let's say they place the object in there, and the object causes the water to rise to 7.65 milliliters. So now they have their object that is in that liquid causing that water to rise. Now, this right here would have been the initial volume. This right here would be the final volume. So we have our initial volume with no object and our final volume with the object inside. Now, to find the volume of the object, you just find how much the water rose. So you take the final minus the initial. So to find the thing, you take final minus initial. And that will give you the volume of the object. So in this particular example, we would take 7.65 minus 5.05. And when we do that, we get a volume of 2.60 milliliters. So for this particular object, this object has a volume of 2.6 milliliters. Now, like I said, finding the mass is easy, so they just take it, put it on a scale, it gives them a mass. So let's say this object, they found out, had a mass of 1.3 grams. So the mass is 1.3 grams. You know what, guys? Let me make this a little easier to see. So initial, make sure you guys can still see. So initial was 5.05, final was 7.65. Volume of the object we established was 2.60. So let's say the mass, we put that object on the scale and we find out that the mass of it is 1.30 grams. Now, the next step is to find the density. All right, so if we're trying to find the density of this, we just take the volume of the object and divide it by the mass of the object. So in this situation, it would give us a density of 2. Now, to figure out which material this would be, you would then look and compare it to the various densities. So on this table, I have a list of various materials that these objects in the lab could be, and their densities, because the density of each object is fixed. We know the density of iron, we know the density of copper, we know the density of lead. All right, so you would compare that to this list and find which material this density would match the closest with. Now, this particular material I just did does not have a match on this table, which means it is not any of these objects here. It's not even close to any of these objects here. So we would have to then go and figure out what exactly it is. But for this particular lab, once you guys start getting the data, all of these objects are going to be on this list somewhere. Okay, so you're just going to have to figure out to the best of your ability, based on what you calculated for the density, that object is going to be. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go and get a bunch of the data. I'm going to find the volume and the mass of all the stuff, and then I'll come back. So I'll be back here in a little bit. All right, guys. So I just went out and I found the mass and the volumes of all of our unknown objects, A, B, C, D, and E. And I've started filling in this table that you see right here. Okay, so on this table, trying to get it so I can see and make sure you guys can see. So we have it listed as our objects A, B, C, D, and E. So all 5 of these are those unknowns I showed you at the beginning of the video. Now, I wrote down the initial volume for each of these objects, and then I wrote down the initial volume of the water in the graduated cylinder, and then I put the final volume after the object had been added. So what you guys are going to have to do is you are going to have to find the volume of the object. Remember, it's just the final volume minus the initial volume. That will give you the volume of the object. Once you have that, the mass of each object is also listed here. So using the volume and the mass, you will then find the density of each of these materials. Once you have the density, you will also go through and ID each of those materials based on the density and comparing it to this table here. Now, as you guys are calculating the volume of the object and the density, you will have to be putting those numbers into Canvas for the lab itself. Now, in order to have time to do that, you are probably going to have to pause the video with this right here, and my creepy eyes looking over top of the paper. So you will have to do that, calculate these, and then put those answers into Canvas, then do the same thing for density, and then do the same thing for IDing. So at this point, I would probably pause the video and go through and calculate everything that you need to calculate. And then once you unpause, use this table here to help you identify which material is which. All right, and you will be putting all those answers into Canvas, and it should grade it for you. Part of your grade is based on if you can correctly identify which material is which. I will give you guys 2 attempts in case you realize you completely messed up on something the first time. If you have questions, let me know. If you need to pause the video at any point to get some data down, feel free to do that. But go ahead, do that, answer the questions in Canvas, then you are done with the lab for the day. Once again, if you need the data is right here. If you need to pause. I'm going to go ahead and end the video at this point though.